money and resources into you, you guys have to make me proud. That kind of attitude. With my own kids, I told them there's only one expectation I have for them. If they make $100, better learn to live on 50. And I said, and from what I see, that's the key to happiness right there. Being able to kind of make 100, live on 50, and that's life in a nutshell. Because I think, listen, kids, I think most kids want to do well. I think most kids want to work hard, and I look at my kids, I say, it's your life. I'm going to be your bumpers, I'm going to be your guardrail, just like my mother. But you know what, it's your life. At the end of the day, life is very simple. You want to know how to be successful? There's a bunch of books written about it, and I'm going to tell you, right? Hard work, right? Keep your head down, right? It's just, these are all trite, but my feeling is most kids want to do well. My own personal expectations for myself, I think about my life using this triangle, and I say, you know what? I try to keep this triangle of personal, professional, public service, and health. My goal every day is to keep that in equilateral triangle, right? So let's think about this. If you're one of these people who works all the time professionally, are you going to do it at the detriment of health? We only have 24 hours in a day, right? You work all the time, it's going to be at the detriment of your health and maybe personal relationships, right? You know those people too, that they spend so much time with their family and friends, they neglect their professional obligations, and they don't take care of their health. And then, there's these guys I see in the gym. I'm like, man, you spend so much time in the gym. How do you have time for work and your family, right? But everything's a trade-off in life, right? So as parents, sometimes we push so hard, maybe the professional aspect, that we don't give our kids the benefit of health and personal, right? So, for me, that's how I think about my life. I want to keep an equilateral triangle. And, there are times when I just say, man, I know I'm getting, I don't have time to work out, and my son knows this, my daughter knows this, right? And I'll say, listen, I got to spend some time working out. And I'll go down the basement, work out there, work out at the Y, right? Second, like I said, high school is about regurgitation. For those in high school, middle school, listen, it's easy, man. You just got to it's just how hard are you willing to grind it out, right? And that's why parents get mad sometimes. They're like, I know this game. You just got to memorize that damn quadratic equation, right? It's not rocket science. I met some smart people getting PhDs. Doing this stuff in high school is not that hard, man. You just got to sit down and get it done. But, essentially by the time you get to college, yeah, you know what? Still the same thing, right? You're learning, but you're memorizing stuff, spitting it out, maybe starting to look at the world a little differently. But once you get to the real world, man, that's when it's like you better take what you've learned, and it's cumulative at that point, right? And so I think about, so Gina said, hey, tell me about investment management. I say, one of my favorite themes is this idea of to a man with a hammer, everything's a nail. Like if you want to be a well-rounded person, you've got to have a lot of worldly wisdom. So just in terms of managing money, you've got to know accounting because that's the language of business. You've got to know math, right? Probabilities, basic algebra, compound interest. That's pretty much all you need to know. I mean, not a lot necessarily, depending on what side of the investment field you are. Some people get a little more advanced. We can talk about that. History, I think it was, if you look at Soros or even various investors, they always say, listen, at the end of the day, you've got to be a student of history to be a student of the markets. In terms of the crowd psychology, there's things like recent event bias, and you have to understand these biases in yourself. We all have biases, right? And so as an investor, you have to understand kind of what kind of bias you have. Economics, that's very fundamental. That's also the language of kind of commerce to some degree. This idea of marginal utility, very useful in investing. And just life experience in a nutshell, right? I mean, sometimes it's like they say about sex. You can talk about it all you want. You really got to do it to understand it, right? I mean, everyone has kids here, so don't be bashful, right? But that's true. It's life experiences. You got to get out there. Just like those people getting bombed, you don't know what it's like to be bombed until you've been there getting bombed, right? So let's just go through quickly. Life lessons. I'm a big believer in always always learning new things. It keeps you humble. It keeps you modest. 7 years ago, I learned to skate, and that's me with a group of friends who I play hockey with, and we ended up winning this championship. It was very exciting. My new endeavor is I started playing squash this past year with a friend of mine. I played a little bit in college, but I started picking it up again. But my kids will tell you, I'm always trying to learn something new, doing something new. Another thing I do a lot of is, have you ever heard of Beachbody, P90X, right? In insanity. Recently, I picked up something called Body Beast, which is kind of a weightlifting program. But always trying to find ways to get better. Life lessons, back to basics. These ideas of like gratitude, saying thank you, goes a long way. I gotta tell you, like I get resumes from kids left and right, and just like the kids who take the time to send a simple thank you is in the distinct minority. It is completely unbelievable to me that people will take your time and not even just send an email or text like thank you for your time. And so that's something I look for because I think it's a differentiator at this point. Bringing positive energy and enthusiasm, it's the same thing, right? It's so basic. But I see these kids and they come in my office and they look like they're about to fall asleep. And I'm like, man, if you're not even excited for the interview, how are you going to get pumped up to work every day, right? So, and then number 5, hard skills versus soft skills. I think a lot of you guys can relate to this. Like I said, the younger you are, the more important hard skills are, right? You got to know your math. You got to, get that 4 or 5 on the AP test. That's important. As you get older, and as you enter your field of specialty, one thing you're going to see is those hard skills, either everyone has them or you're on the same playing field. Those soft skills are going to make the difference. Soft skills like your ability to network, right? Your ability to listen, your ability to lead teams. Like even if you want to be a techie, right? And I don't know if people here in the tech industry, right? The guys who get paid the big bucks are those who are able to lead the team, not necessarily the guy coding in the silo necessarily. I mean, it's simplistic, but I think it speaks to kind of the general fact that listen, I mean, your ability to lead does make a difference. Competitive advantage. This is one of the things I learned from business school, right? Very, very simple. Michael Porter. At the end of the day, in business, you're going to succeed if you're the low-cost product or service, or if you're differentiated. So I look at all the kids today, and I say, listen, you know what? If you want to be different, right? If you want to be successful, you got to find some way to differentiate yourself, right? And so we can talk more maybe about that during the question and answer, but I think that's such a fundamental thing. You hear this time and time again, this idea of differentiation. How are you different? If you're the same, then you're a commodity by definition, right? 7, come back to this theme, right? If you're not the smartest, you can be the toughest. And I think this sums up my life in a nutshell. Because definitely not the smartest, not the fastest, not the most interesting, not the funniest, but I will say over time, essentially, I've gotten knocked down a few times, personally, professionally, and it's this ability to kind of look inside yourself and say, listen, I'm going to keep coming back, right? So, with that, thank you very much for your time today. Hopefully this was helpful and gave you a little bit of insight.
Although I knew you would talk. Well, so the next session will be a 15-minute preset question, and we will project the questions on the big screen. Question number 1. Would you advise your children to follow your footsteps? Would you encourage your children to focus on STEM, which means science, technology, engineering, and math? Given that your school district in Montgomery is also heavily STEM-oriented, just like Westminster, did your parents encourage you to focus on STEM?
Okay, great. Those are great questions. So I'll let my kids answer. Grant, why don't you stand up for a second? So let's hear it. And if you answer wrong, you just owe me 50 push-ups when we get home. All right? And Audrey, why don't you stand up too? Do I encourage you to follow in my footsteps?
Not really.
Not really. No. Audrey, do I say that you should? Do I encourage you to focus on science, technology, engineering, math? No. So I think that answers it in a nutshell. What I would say is, listen, I have 3 children. What I know very clearly from having 3 kids is it's very humbling. Because I think certainly when I had my first, I was like, man, he's going to be like me. right? It's like, yeah, I can see it, like, his personality's gonna be like mine, I'm gonna mold him a certain way, he's gonna I'm gonna have him do this, Listen, every kid comes out unique. And like I said, my wife will tell you, I've learned a lot about this over time. This idea of expectations, like I said, I've been humbled by my own children. So my son, as an example, can essentially sit down, hear the song, and play it on the piano, right? When I was a kid, my mom will tell you, right? It was a fight every day to get me on that piano, right?
You tried to stay on piano for $5 for dinner.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. When I was 7 years old, on the bus ride home, I knew my mom was going to make me practice piano. And I said, hey, listen, do you want to buy my piano for $5? And his mom actually called my mom and said, Ryan says that you guys are selling your piano for $5. Is that true? I think that story says it all. And so, this is my own personal experience. I think, listen, if you have children that match your expectations perfectly, okay, it was like ovarian lottery. You got kind of lucky, okay? In the sense that, if you have a certain vision of what you want your kids to do, and they happen to do that perfectly, that's sheer luck. At the end of the day, I don't have any necessarily expectations for my kids. Like I tell my kids, right? My only expectation is you learn to live within your means, everything else you pursue. So if you happen to, but I'm very honest with what my advice to them. I say, listen, one of my clients is considered one of the top 10 poets in the world. Poet, P-O-E-T, right? And he has to be one of the top 10 poets to be able to invest with me, okay? Now, I will tell you that pretty much any specialist in any medical field, probably over a span of, and I can do the math, roughly 15, 20 years, they're able to compound enough that they could probably start investing with me, right? Just to give you some perspective on things, right? So, listen, everything's probabilities in life. So you want to try to become a top 10 poet? Okay, that's fine, but don't expect it. And so you better learn to live within your means. Because as my kids know, I'm very inspired by Buffett too. My kids should have no expectations that they're going to get anything from me outside of their education, right? So I'm willing to invest in them, but after that, they better figure it out themselves. And so that's why I always tell them, you better learn to live within your means, right? Because I think so much of life, when I went to Princeton, and my kids know, let me give you an example of friends that I've been able to, fortunately make over time. So one of my friends, last summer, we went to their family's chateau in France, right? 300-year-old chateau, humongous, big property. So one of my classmates was a member of the Forbes family, right? And so they had 10 friends over to the chateau, and my kids saw their kids. This would be Malcolm Forbes' great-grandchildren. And they're a little bit kind of aimless. And I said, and then the year before that, one of my friends had bought Elon Musk's first house in Bel Air. We went to that house, right? Amazing bathrooms, right? The most high-tech bathrooms you'll ever see. And I said, there's a problem if you have these expectations that you're going to get these things, because you will not build things yourself. And so much of the fun in life is building things and taking risks. And I feel like sometimes when you are given things, you just become fairly entitled. So my short answer is I have no expectations of my kids. And if they happen to be STEM-oriented, they can do it. My parents, to be fair, my mother wanted me to be a doctor. I will not lie to you, right? So, but that was just so painful. But at the end of the day, when I said that I was going to drop out after junior year, she's like, do whatever you want, just finish college. And so that was the deal I made. And fortunately, I'm here today because it worked out, but it could have gone the other way too. And I went into that knowing full well that it could have gone the other way.
Why did you decide to start your own firm when you probably had the choice of going to the best asset management firm you chose?
So this is a kind of an interesting story. What I will tell you is that I spent 2 summers at Merrill at one of the trading desks, equity trading desks. I always say you can learn a lot about a company by looking at the senior management team, the CEO especially, right? And then one thing, there are 2 lessons I learned. One was, at that point in the mid-90s, if you looked at Wall Street, it was still fairly kind of homogenous. People will tell you at the Merrill Lynch equity trading desk, it's pretty much like former Princeton lacrosse guys, right? And so you had a little bit of this, like what I call a little bit of a bro culture still, which was fine. But at the end of the day, I said, boy, that is not the culture I want to have for my own life. Going out to bars afterwards, at least that was the culture then. It's changed a bit now, but not entirely. I said, it's just not who I am. And so there's this kind of old saying, right? And so also with Warren Buffett, I was like, man, if this guy can do it in Omaha, it's going to be easy for me in Princeton. So, I mean, little did I, that's a kind of a whole nother story entirely. But it was really a matter of culture and of saying, hey, listen, if I'm going to take a risk, I might as well take it early in life, right? Because you have no family, no worries in the world, and if it didn't work out, I could have just, you always felt like it would be easy just to go to a big firm. So that was my own thing. And then last, what I would say is it was very much driven by my own experience with my father. And I think my father will tell you, prior to his career in public service, he was fairly miserable, right? Really dealt with a lot of politics. His job was not entirely rewarding at all times. And I said, you know what? I don't want to have to deal with that. So I'm going to do everything I can to create a culture of my own, right? And so that was kind of my impetus to say, you know what, I'm going to try to do this right out of college.
What is your biggest satisfaction and what is your biggest challenge managing your own firm compared to working for someone else?
Yeah, you know what? So this is fairly timely. So 10 years into my firm, I said to my colleagues, I said, you know what? I'm noticing a lot of bad habits. Essentially, you have people saying, hey, you know what? Why do you do it this way? Oh, because we've always done it this way. I said, that's a horrible answer. We should be always looking for the best way to do things. So essentially, we put a challenge to the whole team, and I said, listen, we're going to tear down our business now, and we're going to pretend we're a startup, and nothing is sacred. We're in the midst of that right now, Gina, as we speak. I've told my whole firm, so we have, we started out with my partner, me, and an operations person. In my type of business, you don't need a lot of people. We're 12 people now. And I've told my whole firm, and once again, hey, listen, guys, you know what? We're going to tear it down, and we're going to rebuild it. I would say the one thing, the biggest satisfaction is, yes, it's your own, it's your baby, it's your DNA, it's your imprint, it's your culture. The biggest challenge is, yeah, the buck stops here, right? So, I mean, during the financial crisis in 2009, that's a great example. I had to go into a room with a whole gang, and I said, listen, guys, everyone here is going to be protected. Everyone here is going to be paid the same amount, except for my partner. So we don't know how long this financial crisis is going to go on for, but A, no one's going to be fired, right? Because we have a great team here. And B, essentially, anything that happens, we'll essentially have to kind of look within ourselves to keep this firm going. And so the buck stops here. Now, essentially, the last, since 2008, 2009, it's been kind of just a great bull market, but we never could have foreseen that. So it's kind of going into a room and saying, hey, listen, you know what? It's my responsibility. I'm going to carry this team because I know there will be a better day. And so it's kind of that challenge of knowing every day when you wake up, you're responsible for other lives. And especially with the Bank of Princeton, I mean, you guys may have followed this. I mean, that's a little bit different because I'm an investor and on the board of directors there. But I feel like a tremendous responsibility for the livelihoods of the people there as well. And it's tough because you guys may have read that, we essentially had negotiated a merger agreement last year that ended up falling through because of regulatory issues with the acquiring bank. But just the same, we built that from zero to it's over $1 billion bank now. And it's one of these things where you feel tremendous responsibilities for the lives there.
What do you advise the students who still have no idea what their passions are in high school and even in college?
Yeah, so I was pretty fortunate to have found a passion relatively early. But as you can see, my life was filled with some twists and turns along the way too. There's been a lot written about passion and grit, and I think generally what I'm reading about passion now, at least the academic literature, that passion stuff is crap. There's no such thing as passion. You really got to do something and do it well before you know whether you're going to like it or not. And so, these kids that are like, oh, I'm looking for my passion. I'm like, you don't know anything. You got to just do it. and then you kind of like it. It's you know, so you guys may have heard this before. You know, the kind of happiness of people who have arranged marriages is not all that different from people who get married through free will. Now, I mean, it's kind of remarkable. I was very fortunate to find someone that I knew in college and love and still love a lot today. But it's true, right? Happiness is what you make of it. So I think, like, to some degree, like, you know, one of the things I've seen is there's a great book called The Paradox of Choice. So I'm 41 right now, and I still have some friends now who still don't know what their passion is. But I think part of it is they've never really dug deep. And I'm always reminded of the story of the admiral who essentially drops his troops, right, on the beach, cuts the ropes, lets the boats flow away, and says, okay, guys, time to fight, right? And that's kind of like life in a nutshell. At some point, you got to cut those ropes and say, it's time to fight. This is what I stand for. This is who I am. You know what? There's so many maybe appealing choices, especially for this generation, right? It's like, oh, you can do anything, right? You can be anything. And sometimes you just got to cut the ropes and say, this is who I am. Because I will tell you, there were times along when my business was kind of struggling. You know, I'm like, you know, if you guys have read the story about Blackstone, Steve Schwartzman, right? Biggest private equity firm in the world now, right? After he left Lehman Brothers, he was going door to door trying to raise money from friends, family, anyone that would give him money. His wife's like, man, I thought I married like a salesman, a door-to-door salesman. Not exactly a compliment, but it's that kind of attitude that, like, you know what, I'm going to do this, I'm going to leave myself no other choices, and this is what I'm going to do. And I think that's what leads to happiness, because then you will have the fulfillment of taking that concentrated energy and really digging deep into something.
How did Princeton education help you? If you had not gone to Princeton or other elite schools, do you think you would still be as successful as you are today anyway?
So in terms of book learning, you can learn that anywhere. So here's my thing is, like, you know, listen, if you just say, hey, if you want to be a doctor, my advice, go anywhere. Save your parents a lot of money. Like, I mean, essentially, you know, listen, I'm very thankful that I went to Princeton. You know, I applied early there, and that's really where I wanted to go, largely to be close to family. And for Wharton, you know, listen, I would say when you go to a school like this, I mean, the opportunities in the networking. If you're going to be that kid behind your desk, right, in the library alone all the time, you are not getting your money's worth. You may have to take your parents' money and burn it. Right? Your job when you get to school, my dad told me this, he said, you're going to meet people that you may not have access to otherwise. So I've told you some stories, some friends of mine in college, you know, one, like I said, ended up buying Elon Musk's first house. We went to visit, our family went to visit them a couple of years ago. Last year, we went to the Forbes Chateau in Normandy, and these are some friends that you meet along the way that maybe I would not have access to had I gone to another school, but essentially you have to make those friendships, right? You have to create those friendships. And so I think that was the biggest difference maker for me. I mean, let me tell you a story about my business school class. So my section had about 100 people. After I finished business school, 5 of those 100 have become clients of mine. So it has pretty much paid for my Wharton degree and then some. And that is, like, I think the power of why you might want to go to some of these schools is if you say, hey, listen, I want to meet some interesting people along the way. But like I said, you have to be genuine. You can't say, hey, listen, you know what, I just want to make friends with, like, people that I think will make money. Or people that will be successful. Like, these are just very organic. Like, I just enjoy meeting people and you know, spending time with people. And you know, that's fun for me. But if you say, hey, listen, I just want to go in there and study all day, you can pick up a book anywhere. And so that's kind of my own personal experience.
What are the traceable skills that help you in your career? And how do you acquire those traceable skills needed? What are the traceable skills you are looking for on your employees?
So traceable skills that help in my career. Listen, at the end of the day, if you want to be on Wall Street and finance, you got to be, like, at least technically sound, right? There's really no way, unless you want to be an investment banker. If you want to be an investment banker, that's what they call, like, the liberal arts of finance, right? That's kind of like a glorified real estate broker, right? Because you just got to, like, you know, wine and dine people. But if you're going to do anything a little bit more quantitative, you know, listen, that's a very basic. You better have some basic quantitative skills. But beyond that, as you move up, you notice that a lot of it is networking. But even in technology. So one of my friends is a partner in, I don't know if you guys have heard of Fanatics or Rulala or ShopRunner. It's a company called Kinetic. So they do all the fulfillment for the NBA store, the NFL store, the NHL store, as an example. And at the end of the day, why do they go with his firm? Because, man, this guy wines and dines him like no other, right? Because at the end of the day, you're talking e-commerce platforms. There's so many e-commerce platforms. If you're the NBA, why don't you just partner with Amazon, right? Why don't you just use Shopify or talk to Shopify or some other company? But essentially, they've carved this niche because of the relationships. Even in technology, right? You have relationships that matter. And so, in terms of traits and skills, what I would say is that in any finance, Warren Buffett, probably the world's greatest politician. You guys follow what happened in this recent electoral cycle, right? He supports Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump gets elected, and he says, "Oh, Trump has a wonderful cabinet. I think he's wonderful. He'll do a great job." And you know what? The market will be higher 10 years from now, higher than it is today. Because you know what? His father, 4-time congressman out of Omaha, Nebraska. And so he learned those lessons. At the end of the day, it's about relationships. Relationships matter. So, like I said, technical proficiency, and you have to have this ability to network. And I think, when you look at Wall Street, even technology, Silicon Valley, it's not too different. It's the same thing. And so, in terms of my employees, what I will say is, I hire for very specific positions. So my most recent hire is a head of concierge services. We've morphed into a family office. And so, with each position, I'm looking for certain things. What I do now is I don't care what schools kids go to. Everyone that comes through my firm takes a battery of personality tests. One thing I've learned over time, and maybe you guys have seen this in your own lines of work, it's less to me about pedigree now and more about I'm looking for certain traits. And what I see with people is people do have fundamental traits. Things like ego drive, attention to detail, sense of urgency, right? And you can test for these things. So even Goldman Sachs, essentially one of the top tier investment banks, trading houses, they have actually stopped on-campus recruiting at the most selective schools. Because I think to a large degree, one of my friends is a partner there, he goes, we go to these good schools, and a third of the kids we recruit every year were duds. And so, Bridgewater Associates, as an example, right? They put the people they interview through just a personality test as well. Because you're looking for certain characteristics in people. I think that, just because you went to a good school, it doesn't necessarily show up. So, and I don't know, Eugene, this could be your experience too, right? A lot of firms now, like the NFL, right? They're not so much just into like the combine for speed and power, right? One of my interns actually went through the NFL combines. He was a lineman at Princeton, and he's like, man, at the end of the day, they're like testing for a lot of these like traits as well. So when the NFL starts recruiting people in this manner, I think it's gotten to a point where people kind of realize, the pedigree is good. You may meet some friends, but I think in this world, I think it counts. I would say for a lot less than it did before. So hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you. So now let me open the questions to the floor.
It's always tough being the first. Go ahead.
Please speak longer so all the people can hear.
So you mentioned that you went to the Ivy College. The best part is networking. So for some kids, they are not very good at social. They enjoy being alone. They want to do things by their own.
Sure.
So do you think for those kids it's better to go some less expensive or less whatever school?
Oh, sure. So the question is if you have a child that's maybe just not as social,
Yeah.
right? Would you advise just going to maybe a less expensive college or something along those lines? It's tough to say, right? I mean, I think that's a very personal question. But if you were to say what would I encourage a child that was maybe someone fairly shy, introverted, I'd say, listen, you know what? Maybe you start learning how to be a little bit more extroverted, right? So a great book. So if you there's a great documentary about Warren Buffett now called Becoming Warren Buffett. I don't know if anyone has seen it. It's on HBO. Okay, pick it up. So in his office, he's got you may know his educational pedigree. He went to Wharton undergrad. Then he finished up his college at the University of Nebraska, and then he went to Columbia, right? On his wall in his office, the only thing he has is a certificate he got from the Dale Carnegie class, right? And so, what's Dale Carnegie? I don't know if anyone here heard of Dale Carnegie, right? Dale Carnegie